looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. I saw something on the evening news that I can't explain. My work friends and I were out at our favorite pub last night. Not a really fancy place, but, cheap beer and close enough to home that I don't have to drive. The night started out normally enough. The four of us crammed into a small table off in the corner, mostly talking shop and shitting on our boss. Being this was the middle of the week, there weren't too many other people around. Maybe around 8 or 9 others in the whole place. Everybody just kind of keeping to themselves. Sort of people you'd expect to see in a pub on a Wednesday. Anyway, from where I'm sitting, I have a pretty good view of the TV behind the bar. Jesse, the bartender, is kind of lazily flipping through channels and passes by our local news channel. There's a brief burst of orange and red on the screen, which I register as a fire happening somewhere, which then disappears as Jesse switches over to the next channel. Something about the image looks oddly familiar, though. "Hey, Jess, can you switch that back?" I call out to her. The news comes back on, and suddenly I recognize the building in the frame. It's my building, and it's burning. "Holy shit," I say, loudly enough that a few people follow my gaze to the television. "That's my apartment." The crowd in the bar falls kind of quiet, everybody staring up at the screen now. The screen shows a wide shot of the outside of my building. The camera must be set up on the north end of the block because I recognize a lot of shops on the ground floor. Property management, dry cleaner, convenience mart, etc. The top left corner of the building is aflame. It's not a huge fire by any means, but it looks like a few units between the top 4 floors or so have already been engulfed by the flames. "Jesus, man," one of my coworkers says. That sucks." There's an uncomfortable murmur of agreement that passes around the table. I mean, I don't blame them. I wouldn't know what to say in this situation either. "Yup," I agree, just as awkwardly. Thankfully, my apartment is only about halfway up and located on the west side of the building. I cross my fingers, hoping my stuff will be okay. The camera cuts to a reporter on the scene. He's standing a little further away. Looking at the shops in the background, I can tell he's across the street on the northwest corner of the building. "Firefighters are expected on the scene any moment," he's saying, "and hopefully they'll be able to contain this horrible inferno before it spreads any further." As I was saying before, it's very fortunate that everyone was able to evacuate the building before things got too bad, or who knows what tragic events may have unfolded. "He's really laying it on thick," my other coworker jokes. I chuckle a bit. All things considered, at the moment it really didn't seem all that bad. But then, a few moments later, hang on, the reporter on TV says, "we're getting some updated information. It seems, hang on one moment while we readjust the camera." The previously locked down camera starts to shift, the angle focusing on an area of the building about halfway up the west side. All the lights in the building are out except for one. I feel a weird creeping sensation as I start counting the windows from the bottom. 5 up, 2 over. That's my place. I swore I turned that light out, I think at first. Then I see it. There's a person standing in my window. The camera is zoomed out too far to make out any features, but it definitely looks like a man, and it's definitely standing in my apartment. I watch petrified as the camera zooms in closer, the reporter babbling on about the overlooked, ill-fated soul still trapped in the blazing such and such. As the image gets closer, I start to make out more details. The person is dancing or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but he's moving around a lot, and everything he's doing has this bizarre rhythmic quality to it. He starts waving his arms in the air, back and forth, and then he's waving them up and down at his sides. Then he's banging both fists on the glass. Then he's waving his arms over his head again, back and forth. Everything he's doing is to the exact same tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts jumping up and down, waving his arms over his head like he's trying to get someone's attention from a long distance, but everything is to the exact same rhythm, over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. What in the fuck? I say, my voice a hoarse whisper, and then the camera gets a little closer, and finally we can make out the person's features. It looks almost exactly like me. It's wearing the exact same clothes that I'm wearing now, clothes I changed into moments before leaving the apartment earlier. Its face looks almost exactly like mine as well, except for its eyes. Its eyes are far too big for a normal person. It also has this almost comical look of horror on its face. I don't even know how to describe it. Imagine if someone were pretending to look scared, but as a joke. It would have almost seemed funny if the circumstances were different, but instead, it was just extremely unnerving. No one in the bar is talking now. Everyone is fixed on the TV. The person is still swaying and waving around, beating its hands on the glass or jumping in circles. I almost don't hear the reporter mention the fact that firefighters have rushed into the building and are now heading for my floor. Oh God, I think, without really understanding what was happening. Please don't go in there. I stare transfixed at the screen. From this angle, you can just barely see the top of my front door through the window, not too far behind where this creature is flailing around. Right now it is holding its face in its hands and shaking its head from side to side as if saying no. Suddenly the door behind it bursts open as, presumably, the firefighters have entered my apartment. The creature stops moving. For a second, I see its expression change. The comical look of horror is gone, replaced by a huge smile filled with enormous, pointed teeth. Then the lights go out. We all just sat there, staring at the screen as the camera slowly zoomed out from the now dark window. No one says anything, as we all quietly pay our bill and leave. I went directly to my sister's place across town and asked to stay with her. I told her there was a fire at my apartment, and that's it. When I tried to find footage from the news online later that night, it seemed like they had edited that last part out. I don't know if any of you on this subreddit know what that thing was, but I hope they didn't put out that fire. I hope they let the whole fucking place burn to the ground. My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours, so I got home at around 11 p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of joints and spark one up as I pull YouTube on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close passing out when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I've been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never causing much in the way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I go back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare-knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I remembering waking up in darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once it did, I grabbed my phone, checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m. from what I remember. I was starving, and so I got up, began walking towards the fridge. And then I noticed it. A soft but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch, my roommate coming home. The shower turning on. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off? I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell? Realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room, but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. Hey man, you all right? No response. I considered kicking the door down, but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. Hey man, I couldn't sleep, so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. Sent 2 hours ago. I look at the bathroom door, then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me that he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there, go back into the living room and turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I never could have imagined being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone, my roommate's phone. The panic begins setting in, and immediately I grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, and so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately, I get this feeling that I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. Soon, I'm looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know, its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away. But there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion, that this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed, that the only element of its composition was that of unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it, but the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as batshit. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea who it might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they just kept on asking. Soon, I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was broken by a single muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence and the officers still hadn't come down. Soon, I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me, and the scene had fallen into chaos. Officers shouting over each other and into their radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms, where I found two nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many different people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside of the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall? And one of the most unsettling ones, ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in, shit that I had written off as figments of my imagination, simply because I had no other explanation for them. I did hear the voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or a man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then there was that one time where I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered. But as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned on the lights, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up as a product of late-night drowsiness at the time, and I had never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suit spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phones. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. A cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. What happened? I asked him. What did you guys find up there? He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. I don't know, he said. I really don't know. I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A fucking fire. Update, I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now, and I can hear the shower. I found a 4,600 years old document describing a humanoid species named Sigil. I've been researching Mesopotamia my whole life. I remember being fascinated by that civilization ever since I was a preteen. Unlike my friends and schoolmates, I spent my time daydreaming of Sumerian kings and the Euphrates River. I then grew up, went to college, and became a Sumer researcher. I'm not a particularly prominent historian, but I'm one of the very best when it comes to translating Sumero-Akkadian cuneiform writing, especially from around 2800 to 2500 BC. I wasn't expecting a lot when I was invited to translate some newfound tablets. I was personally excited, but was sure the contents would be mundane enough. My employer was a little private museum in Istanbul that specialized in artifacts from the Gilgamesh dynasty and prided itself from having snatched these new items from the British Museum. I was welcomed at the airport by the owner's second assistant, a flamboyant and clever Arabic man who spoke English with almost no accent. I've been assigned to accompany you during your stay, madam. Please inform me of your every need. Ayman was a pleasant man around my age, the Turkish version of an English butler. He gave me space to work, but politely reminded me of making at least 2 meals a day when I was too deep in my work. His presence helped so much with my productivity. Still, no matter how great an experience it was, I'm terrified of my findings. The following is my translation of one of the tablets. We humans are being killed daily. The Sigil are an inferior species in every way, but they have something we lack, something that should be a curse and yet, somehow, is their biggest strength. They don't know when to give up. They surprised us with their resistance, and they are so numerous. The Sigil took a habit of procreating like the rats or ants, and now they are as numerous as the stars in the sky. They always had plenty of children, but most of them would die of disease or being attacked by the predators on their precarious houses. That way their numbers were always around the same, unless they were on war between themselves, which happened constantly for simple resources like water. But now some of the Sigils, merely through observation and the trial and error method, learned of our medicine and architecture, and they started to flourish and prosper. Too much. After invading and overpowering their fellow Sigil from other tribes, a group reached our empires and slaughtered us. We hit them back with our better horses, better weapons, better built men, and we slayed them. But despite that, they never stopped. They are indefatigable. I wish I could understand why. We're taller, stronger, and dotted with brains they would think only a god could possess, and still they fight. Just because they learned how to walk in 2 legs a while ago, they think they can rule the world, despite the fact that their reasoning is puny and their sciences are non-existent. They don't even know how vast the world is. That's laughable. Like their ancestors, even inferior hominids, their life is only worth after procreation, so their children dead before mating age are useless and forgettable. This primitiveness is what enrages me about them the most. The Sigil wants our other secrets, our king. They want to be us. Tired of seeing my sisters and daughters die, I'm utterly ashamed to admit that I was scared and reached out to the king. I advised him to strike a deal with the Sigil. At first, he refused, but after a lot of our blood was shed and only around a few hundreds of us remained, our king Gilgamesh finally decided to surrender to the inferior species so the rest of us could be safe. We would retreat to our underground city and live safely for generations to come. The king would stay with them on the surface to rule them and develop their society, and stay there with them for precisely 4.560 years before we fiercely take our world back. Of course, they agreed. They don't even understand how much time that is, but it's not a lot for us. We never die. We are simply reborn on a new body on a new generation, every time wiser, stronger, purer. We are moving to our fortress deep inside the earth by the ending of the forthcoming Ara Adaru Arku month. We will make no mistake this time. We'll keep the Sigil under constant surveillance and learn all their secrets. Next time, we won't have any weaknesses. Just like they almost did to us, we will destroy them all mercilessly. I was shocked to realize that we are the Sigil. There's a way more advanced civilization living underground on this planet as you read this. By chemical testing, the museum expert was able to determine the age of this tablet with incredible precision. The Sumerian calendar is very alike to the Gregorian calendar we use nowadays. It has 12 months, alternating between 29 and 30 days, following the moon cycles, which have 29.5 days. There's a 13th month with 33 days called Ara Adaru Arku that only happens every 3 years. It was added to compensate for the discrepancy. It wasn't hard for me to convert 4.562 years for them to our Gregorian calendar using the tablet's age as the year 0. And I found out that the real humans with their superior brains and hatred for us across millennia are coming back to reclaim their land soon. How soon? According to my calculations, the 4.560th Sumerian year is next year. Alright, that wraps up today's video of true spooky stories from Reddit. I hope these eerie tales kept you entertained and maybe even gave you a little chill. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe and watch out for anything lurking in the shadows.